So, a summer that will live long in memories in our part of the country for some of the worst possible reasons, of course, rioting, looting and the deaths of 3 young men. And yet, paradoxically, some observers think these terrible events took David Cameron, the Prime Minister, onto some surprisingly secure political ground, because in a way they could be seen to strengthen his argument in support of the big society as a way of fixing broken Britain. Well, now, one of the formative influences on him was 4 years ago when, as opposition leader, he visited Balsall Heath in Birmingham. He stayed overnight with a family there. Well, Susana Mendonça has revisited Balsall Heath to find out if this big idea really is making a difference.
Meet Abdullah, his wife Shahida, his mother Sophia and his kids. 4 years ago, they had an unusual house guest.
Hello. Hello, Smina. Hello, David Cameron. Hi, nice to see you. Hi there. How are you?
David Cameron came here to find out how Balsall Heath's community has been helping itself.
Is he robbing you or are you robbing him? Which way is he going? Both ways.
Back in the days, there was a problem with drugs, there was a problem with prostitution. The streets were actually controlled by drug dealers.
That's what this neighbourhood used to be like until residents like Mohammed and Abdullah started patrolling the streets.
When David Cameron came down to Balsall Heath, he helped us actually clear this car park up, and he actually found a needle here. So we were trying to, encourage him to think about the broken society that we're living in, we feel, and how it can be mended, and thus the idea of the big society coming out, which I do believe in.
And the forum's work got a mention in Mr Cameron's party conference speech in Birmingham last year.
In Balsall Heath, where local residents were fed up with the pimps and the prostitutes and the gangs and the drug dealers. So they set up street patrols to clear them out of the area and turn what was a no-go zone into a desirable place to live.
It's certainly become a better neighbourhood for one pensioner who's getting help from these volunteers after having an eye operation.
They're great. They look after us old people, you know, and they come and help us out and come and knock at our door whether we're all right, we're not dead or collapsed or something.
But building this big society idea costs money. The Balsall Heath Forum needs as much as £300,000 a year to keep running. The Forum used to get at least £60,000 worth of that from Birmingham City Council each year, funding that's since dried up. And so now its challenge is to survive without government cash, and it's getting advice from big business on how to do that.
The push now is to recognise that businesses can't shy away from it. They are a massive part of this community, whether they live here or not, and they have to work with the Forum.
But some volunteers welcoming the Deputy Leader of the City Council this week worry that businesses won't be willing to give. SHABANA, whose youth team checked on elderly residents during the summer riots, says the big society won't work without government funding.
Definitely communities do need to be more active and help each other, do some community work around the area, but a community always needs that support from the government, because there's only so much we can do.
Society has never been able to exist without voluntary sector and the faith sector making a contribution. The statutory bodies cannot deliver everything that makes society tick.
Back in the house where David Cameron spent his first night in Balsall Heath, I hear how the big society can and is working here.
So much happening that he needs to come down and actually see the big society in action.
And who does his daughter want to see?
We'd like him to bring Florence.
They may only have to wait until next year when the Tory conference heads back to Birmingham.
Susana Mendonça reporting, and incidentally, BBC1 listeners can keep up to speed with political developments in Birmingham and the Black Country with Susana throughout this coming week. Now, I'm sure it's a safe bet that rioting and looting would have had no place in the vision of local communities presented in a book called The Big Society. Now, it's written by one of our local Conservative MPs. Conservative MP, in fact, for Hereford and South Herefordshire, Jessie Norman. Well, a few days ago, during the week, I caught up with Mr Norman on the stage of the Courtyard Theatre in Hereford during a break in a business conference that was being held there. If I were to challenge you to write another chapter in this book, to take account of the summer riots in England. What do you think would be the main principles that we could expect to see in that chapter?
It was the tremendous sense of lack of purpose and youth unemployment, and as well as the kind of gang culture that reinforced that. So all of those aspects have got to be brought into play. So I think what a chapter would do would be to take the same principles that we have already in play and then play them out in the context of the riots with all their many causes and effects.
You say in your book that much of this thinking has its origins with people like Edmund Burke in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Some of the language after the riots was apocalyptic. Do you see a connection there between the origins of the idea and the social difficulties we face today?
Yes, I mean, we are undoubtedly in some difficulties as a society. We've got the highest level of drug abuse on almost every area across the whole of Europe. We've got very high levels of teenage pregnancy. We've got high levels of social deprivation in key parts of the country and cities. So there's no doubt that there are serious issues that we've got to be engaged with. We've got to think outside the political box. We can't really be turning to the state as the only source of support for these people and these institutions. We've got to be looking at ways in which they can help themselves and in which government thoughtfully can engage with those institutions that can do the best job of putting people back on their feet and into a fulfilling life.
Some commentators are saying that far from producing the desired effect, smaller government, there are actually new people being appointed into jobs by local authorities to coordinate the activities of the voluntary sector. So it's having absolutely the opposite effect from the one you describe.
You're always going to get lots of divergence, particularly with a government that's stressing localism and pushing more power down to local authorities and local institutions. But out of that diversity comes innovation and energy. And the real question, I think, for the big society is whether it can change the whole political terms of debate over the next 2 or 3 elections. And I think there are signs it's already starting to do that. If you look at what the Labour Party has been saying over the last year, they've moved from some hostility towards rather a high degree of embracing of the diagnosis and of many of the conclusions.
Part of the debate, of course, about the big society is that it's not really the big society at all. It's a big excuse for simply cutting public spending.
As you know, the Conservative Party has been thinking about these issues. David Cameron's been talking about them for at least 5 years before the election. It wasn't a secret that with the level of economic crisis that we've been in, measures to curb public spending would have to be undertaken. The real question is whether or not that can be used to trigger local energy and to release these institutions, because that's the balance we need to bring back into our own society.
Jessie Norman MP and me on stage at the Courtyard Theatre. We didn't get much of an audience though, did we? Now, here once again is John Stone.